Hello, my name is Owen, and welcome to my quick review of Emily Henry's Happy Place. What I want to do is give a brief overview of the book is about, tell you the things that I liked, and tell you the things that I didn't like. Romance, at least pure romance, is a genre that I don't delve into super often. I've been known to enjoy it in the past. I'm always a fan of the great rom-com. And I was getting an itch for just a story about love, I've read kind of fantasy books that delve into romance, like the more spicy fantasy, as you can say, just trying to get a feel of the more popular books and culture right now. So it's fantasy romance and it's straight romance. I feel like are kind of dominating the seller lists these days, at least of the masses. So this book is about our main character, Harriet, who's going on a vacation with her friends. It's the last vacation with her friends where she can see them. Two of her friends are getting married, but her ex is there, and they didn't tell their friends that they broke up. That's the general conceit of the book. If like you were like to TikTokify it, I guess it would be a second chance romance, is what the kids would call it these days, the youths, as they say. So if you're into just liking books by the general trope that they're in, I think it'd be a second chance romance, right? It's about exes pretending to be together for the sake of friendship and happiness, right? So going into this book, I wouldn't say I had very much expectations at all. It's been a while, or I don't think I've ever read a book just about a straight, like, two people, their relationship, falling in love, but like in the more rom-com-y sense, because it kind of feels like a rom-com movie, right? I've read like Call Me By Your Name, which is obviously a romance book, but it's like more like deep, you know what I mean? But this one is just, I just treated it like a rom-com when I was reading it, which I think was the perfect way to approach it because this book is a lot of fun. I did enjoy it. It's a relatively fast read, and you get like the gimmick very early on in the story that these two people have to pretend to be together. And I feel like that's the judge. If you're going to read a fun romance, what the gimmick is something that's very important, or at least it's very important to me because very straight up, it's kind of a ridiculous scenario, right? Like, why would these two people just pretend to be a couple the whole week? Obviously, it's like forced proximity, right? They got to pretend to like each other, and like the tension of like faking it, like, will it become real? Obviously, it's like general tropey stuff like that. But I think in terms of this, coupled with the structure of the book, which has like flashbacks of the relationship, so we're kind of focused on this part where it's like the rom-com-y, oh, let's pretend to be together, and then, oh, we're gonna fall in love, obviously. Coupled with like the flashbacks to the beginning of the relationship, as well as like the end of the relationship the first time around, and like all the middle stuff in between, and kind of catching us up as we go along to how they got to the point where they've broken up, but still have to pretend in front of their friends in order to preserve this happy place of their vacation home in Maine. So I think that the gimmick, coupled with this unique structure of doing the flashbacks, made it fresh in that way. Obviously, you can read these books out from a mile away, like how they're going to play out. And I feel like that's what people are looking for when they're reading these books. And that's quite frankly what I was looking for as well. I wasn't looking for an ending where everyone's miserable and then it's just like, well, that's life, not everything works out. That's not the type of book I'm kind of reading, especially if they got those pastel covers where it's just people without faces, okay? You don't give me a sad ending, don't give me a deep ending. We're not trying to be philosophical here, right? So if that's what you're looking for, you're in the wrong genre, my friend. But that being said, I think the characters were strong. I think Emily Henry is great at like banter. There was a great back and forth between the two characters. So if you like kind of like sharp back and forth dialogue, you're in the right place. I will say though, in terms of one of the negatives, a lot of the characters and kind of just like the whole conceit in general, as is with kind of more tropey stories, it's all kind of paper thin in terms of like how much pressure you can apply on these characters, especially those outside of our main couple. Obviously, it's about Harriet, it's about Win, our main lovers. But the friends, there's kind of like a subplot of like the friends not seeing each other enough. There's like, oh, like they're growing out of each other's relationships, they're growing apart or whatever. But especially towards the end when that subplot was coming to its climax, you're not as invested, right? Because you're spending 90% of your thoughts, 90% of your energy on this relationship. So they're trying to switch back and say, oh, these characters are deep and they have emotions too. They're having an emotional pinnacle. it's not there. And I feel like a lot of times all the friends kind of blur together into one mesh of names that really don't mean anything, and their personalities don't really shine through. There are some good moments, some good moments of group banter, which I did enjoy, and it made me think of, back in college when you had your group of friends. And funnily enough, I went on spring break to Maine, so it's kind of like nostalgic in that sense. But a lot of like the side characters, it could have been two people, not necessarily in terms of story, but just like in terms of personality types. There was just two. There's like the fun ones or like the more strict ones, and they're all kind of just variations on that in the side, in the peripheral, right? I think that our main characters, Harriet and Win, I don't think I have a great grasp on who they are as people and what makes them tick, but I think there's enough of it to carry the story in terms of like their weaknesses, especially with Win. His anxieties, his insecurities are made very clear through Harriet's perspective, and then kind of through how she like handles the situation, you kind of like infer her weaknesses as well. And that's an important thing in a romance as well. You got to know the character's strengths, you got to know the character's weaknesses. But in terms of the most important thing in the story, if you're going to read a pleasurable, fun, like romance, you got to ask yourself the question, how is the romance? Is the romance good? What makes the romance good? Now, that's a deep question. Now, I feel like this book, and I could see people not liking this portion, but the book does a good job at setting up why they're attracted to each other, especially like with the tension of them like touching each other when they're broken up. It's like, oh, but I hate you. It's like, but you gotta like pretend to touch me, which is kind of stupid, right? It's the gimmick, okay? But then also the flashbacks of when they first met, they're in their flirting stage. The book sets up really well why they're attracted to each other. There's a lot of physical attraction. There's a lot of like kind of like sparks, right? Oh, like they just can't stop looking at each other, can't stop eating each other up. But the book doesn't do a great job at explaining why they're in love with each other, which I feel like is a lot more challenging, a lot more complex thing to convey in a book. But in a romance, is it necessary? I don't know. I think that the author does enough to set the stage of how they could have fallen in love. Like, for example, and this isn't really a spoiler, by the way, there's, in the beginning stage of their relationship, the main character states how her and Win stay up all night talking to each other. What do they talk about to make them fall in love? We don't get a glimpse into that, but you could kind of like fill in the dots yourself and say like through long conversations, you're talking to each other hours at night, it's like kind of the budding of like their relationship, and like they're moving to cities together. Like there's a lot of groundwork there that would make them fall in love and want to spend the rest of their lives together. However, we don't really get to see like what makes them specifically compatible other than the physical attraction. I understand that a lot of readers in general come here for like the physical tension, like the making out, and like the build up, the tension to the physical outpouring of love, if you know what I mean. But I think in a romance, you kind of gotta balance the line between them, because sometimes I felt like this book teetered on the precipice of being just about like, okay, these people both find each other hot, okay, but what else is there? I think there's enough there that it didn't bother me like all the time. It was just at some moments I'm like, okay, you guys are talking about how much you want to touch each other. It's like, you've been dating for like 6 years, okay? How about say something about their personalities, okay? It doesn't really happen that frequently. However, like I said, I feel like the author inserts enough like sweet scenes or sweet things that they did, like staying up all night talking to each other, like waiting for each other, and like, like stuff like that, to kind of tell you that there is love there. There is something else there, even if we don't necessarily get to see how that was built or how that's necessarily displayed. It's complicated. I'll have to read more straight romances to see if this is something that is done well or has been done well. So if there's great romances where it's like less about physical and more about just like pure like love and adoration and how that's built, I'd like to hear a recommendation about that. I'm gonna have a guess though that in like this general the more popular modern romances, it's gonna lean more on the side of attraction rather than love, which I understand is just kind of more flashy, right? It's easier to write a fantasy action story about slaying a dragon rather than like conquering your inner demons, right? It's just the nature of the beast, okay? But overall, I thought this book was a lot of fun. If you are a fan of this kind of like light read romance stuff, I think it's a great one. You probably already read it. I know she's coming out with another book this April that's apparently very sought after. Might have to give it a shot. I think it was a good time. I don't regret reading it. I was looking for a light, fun, romancy read, and that's exactly what I got. And you can't fault a book if you get exactly what you're asking for. Am I right? Someone write a book about that. Be sure to like and subscribe if you like the video and want to see more like in the future. And as always, thanks for sticking around.